So we've seen a little bit about interventions, nudging. We did also some classic heuristics and biases. But we need to know and understand where judgment and decision making came from, where it is embedded, and why it emerged. Why did Daniel Kahneman, a psychologist, win the Nobel Prize in economics in 2002? Why did Richard Thaler win the Nobel Prize for economics in 2017 for behavioral economics? So what is the behavioral in economics, and what brought this whole subdomain of economics to become more prominent and recognized? So we'll do some of the classic game theory things dating back all the way to Nash and the Nash equilibrium that we discussed very, very briefly. For each one of these tasks, I will ask you to look at an experiment, do the experiment, participate in this together with the person sitting next to you, think about how to best do this experiment, and then also reflect about the Homo economicus. So if we assume a rational actor based on the classic economics, what would person respond to this? And then we'll do a little bit of a simulation. We'll run this. So I'll ask you to make predictions. We'll do this together, and then we'll see what comes out of that. So this is the Homo economicus. This person has been existing for a very long time, since the beginning of economics. And I don't know why, but he has glasses and he holds a lot of money in his hand, a very big brain, supposedly 100% rational, focused on money as an incentive. And what he cares about is optimizing as much as possible, optimizing the amount of money that he has. The context that we'll be talking about is a context where there's you and another stranger participating in a lab experiment. You never meet each other. You will never you don't meet the experimenter. No one else knows about your decision. So this is a completely anonymized decision, not in the context of this classroom, but generally this is the Homo economicus context. And the question is, what would you decide as the Homo economicus? Homo economicus clear? Do you have him envisioned in your mind? All right, so in your sheets, there's experiment 3A, and we're starting from the most basic game theory experiment. I'm sure many of you have heard of this before. This is the Dictator giving game, the classic. So here we have a Dictator game description that goes as follows. The first player, the Dictator, which is you, gets an endowment, a cash prize from the experimenter, that is me, and determines how much to give to a second player. The recipient has no influence over the outcome of the game. So the other person just receives whatever it is that you two in your group decide to give to the other side. And then I'm asking two questions. As the Dictator, decide how much you would want to give out of your 100 Hong Kong dollars to another classmate. And remember that they must accept whatever it is that you give them. And then I would ask you, what would the Homo economicus 100% rational player give in this scenario? Okay, so take 2 minutes, discuss this together with the person next to you, come to some conclusion, write it down, and then we'll work based on that. Okay, have we made a decision? Does each group have a decision to? To come together as yeah, you can discuss, but come to some conclusion on what you want to put down. Do you need another 10 seconds to discuss? Yeah? Okay. I need 2 groups that would volunteer. Who's volunteering? Volunteer number 1, volunteer number 2. Yeah, volunteer number 2. Okay. Which would you rather be? The accepting, the dictated, or the dictator? What do you want to be? We don't want to make the decision. Do you mind being the dictator? Yeah? Is that okay? All right. So based on this interaction, because I was thinking it's like, first of all, it's a little bit difficult to work this out with cash. And with one Hong Kong dollar bill, so I can split this instead, like between the two of you. Instead, I have like Hershey Kisses. Okay. So this is what I have over here. So I'm gonna give this to the dictator. Thank you for volunteering. I don't have 100 of these, so I'll have multiples of 10. Okay. So each one of those represents 10 Hong Kong dollars. How much? All right, good. So now we have a fairly good simulation of this. It's a good thing to volunteer in this class. So as the dictators, what did you write your decision is? How much are you giving to the dictated? Give free? Okay. Good. So what's your reaction to this? So now we want to hear what the dictated. You received 3 of those. How do you feel about this? Did you know what? Yeah, just assume that each one of those is 10 Hong Kong dollars. This is how we simulate it. Okay. So this is like the money that you received out of the. Yeah. So you know that you have 100. As the experimenter, you see me give them 100 Hong Kong dollars, and now you gave them. They gave you 30 of that, so you got. Yeah. How do you feel about this? Is the dictator? Yeah, she seems happy with 3. Yeah. You know that there's a pool of $100. Yeah. 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 Okay. But you know that there's 100 and you got 30. You're happy with that? Okay. Perfect. Why did you give 30? What's the thought? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. Why keep to yourself more than what why not give more than what you have? The what? Selfishness? Okay. You need some compensation, right? Okay. Why the 3 or 30 rather than middle point? Okay. We don't want to be too fair because we're self-oriented. 10 is too selfish. Why is 10 too selfish? Okay. How would you feel if you only got 2 and not 3? Feel great?
There's so many things that are context specific.
Okay, I see. Because you want to be able to split this better. Okay, but let's say that you're like a single individual and you get 20 out of the 100. Is there a big difference between 20 and 30? Shouldn't be. Is there a big difference between 20 and nothing? 30 and nothing? Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. Good. All right. So based on what it is that you wrote in your sheet, what did you observe over here? Are they both acting as the Homo economicus? What's your impressions of the interaction that happened between them two? Let's start with the Homo economicus. What would the Homo economicus do as the dictator? What did you write? Yeah, what did you write? What would the Homo economicus do? I don't think we're allowed in the classroom, but you can keep those. Yeah, like in regular circumstances, no problem. But yeah, You just need to stare at those. It's like a self-control exercise. Okay, that's another interesting psychological experiment. So Homo economicus, what would Homo economicus do with the Dictator game? What did you write? Sorry? Keep it all. Why? Yeah, exactly. Right. So economics for a very long time, since the beginning of time, has assumed that we're operating like Homo economicus. Did we operate like Homo economicus in this kind of situation? What did they do? Yeah, so they did not give zero. They gave something different, right? What's your conclusion from that? What should we go and tell the economic literature about this? Did they optimize? Yeah, so it seems like they cared about more than just optimizing money. What else did they care about? Social relationships. Okay. Explain more about that. Yeah. Why would this happen? Why would people deviate from this? You wanted to say something? Yeah. Kind of random. They just came across this money. Okay. So you're talking about motivations that seem to go far beyond what the Homo economicus seems to imply. Seems to be a lot more than just money. Seems to be about whether this is randomly come across this or whether this was gained in some way, that you've earned it, right? And then you talk about things like fairness, like social equality, right? Some reciprocity. Yeah. So already from this very, very basic experiment, we can learn a few things. First, the Homo economicus, the economics model, seems to be lacking. Something is missing over here. We're not capturing something that is fundamental to humanity. Perhaps this is okay if we're talking about computers, but this is not working when we're talking about humans. Now, if we try to understand, so here, instead of zero, giving zero, they gave 30. How can we update our models? How would you suggest that we update the model here? What should we add to the model aside from 100% money? Let's try and add something to this equation. Self-perception, put this in an equation. Let's quantify this. How to quantify? His self-perception is X, therefore he gave Y. How would you put this in an equation? Let's put this in a hypothesis, a relationship. The more X, then the more Y, or the less Y. The more that he cares about self-perception, what would happen? Okay. So self-perception, you're talking about, he wants to perceive himself as a good, honest person, right? Yeah, okay. Right. So the more that he cares about these kinds of aspects, we can do a hypothesis, a relationship between X and Y. The more he cares about self-perception, the way that you defined it, the more he's going to give, right? So if we find somebody else, we can ask them, what is your self-perception? We can ask him self-perception and then compare these two and then put this in an equation, right? So we can update the very simplified model of maximizing 100% money to including something like self-perception, right? Equality, how things were earned. Now, I want to give you another version of this, which is a very slight manipulation of this that judgment decision making does quite often, that shows the importance of psychology. So have a look at experiment 3B, talk this over, and come to some conclusion of how you both, you and your partner, are going to answer this game. And here again, I'm asking you, what do you want to do? What would you do in this situation? And what would the Homo economicus do? Okay, have you come to a conclusion? Have you come to a decision? All right, so let's try and discuss this a little bit. First of all, what changed? What is the difference between the first game and the second game, 3A and 3B? What's the difference? But both of them have the same kind of generosity, right? If you want to be generous, you can be generous in both of these. Why does ownership matter over here? Let's try and look at this from the Homo economicus perspective. What is the difference between 3A and 3B from the Homo economicus perspective? What changed? Nothing technically. Why? Same goal, right? The money you want to maximize, right? Okay. Let's stimulate this again based on your answers. I need 2 more teams who volunteers. So you'll be the dictator. Is that okay? All right. So I'm giving them 10, 10 of these again. Good. I hope I have enough. 2, 4, 6. Yeah. All right. So this is yours. 2, 4, 5. 2, 4, 5. And now as the dictators, you're supposed to come and take away from them however much you feel like you want to take. What did you write? 8. Yeah, take away 8. 8. Great. So once again, we'll start with you. How do you feel about this decision? You're confused a bit? You've expected them to take less. It seems like from the response over here that some other people were surprised as well. Why did you expect them to take less? Prosocial behavior. So this was not prosocial enough. They left you with 2. They built up on the feedback over here that they want this to be split by 2, right? But they didn't want 4 because that would be, you still need to be a bit selfish. So they prefer to go with a 2. But still feels a bit off to you for some reason. Why? Yeah, you already had this in your hand, right? How about you? Do you feel the same? You're happy with your 1? Okay. Yeah, share with us. What did you write? You will take 60? Okay. So this is what you expected. You expected them to take only 60 or 6 Hershey. Okay. Good. Thanks for that. What led you to the decision to take 8? They seem to be a bit disappointed with this. Personality, yeah. Let's talk personality. No, say we love being selfish. Yeah. Oh, get into the role. Yeah, dictator. Just the name implies something very strong and forceful. Okay. Yeah, that's very good. Anything to add to that? So now that you've seen both reactions and you heard them contemplate this a bit more, what would you say about the differences between these 2 experiments, 3A and 3B? What were you expecting would happen? What eventually happened? And what do you think the differences between 3A and 3B mean here regarding economics versus psychology? What did you gain from this? Very good. So what kind of insights do we have? First of all, and I think you mentioned this before, people care about ownership. Second of all, there are different kinds of ownership, and it depends on how you perceive ownership. All this is not included in the Homo economicus model, right? If we look at the original Dictator game framing, it's 3A. However, we can see that with a very slight modification of the Dictator game, we can arrive at very different conclusions, different predictions, looking at psychology. So personality differences, perception differences of how you think about ownership, and so forth. So very simple demonstrations of that. Based on this, I'm going to ask you to try and model this for me. So last session that we met together, I talked a little bit about within subject design and between subject design. And I wanted to show you a little bit about how we write this in papers. So when we have an experiment, we try to explain to our readers, to our reviewers, what our experimental design is. And we write the independent variable with the various conditions. Then we indicate for the experimental condition what is the name, the condition title, and then what was manipulated. And then we write the DV, the dependent variable, in a table very much like this table. So what I want you to do is think about 3A and 3B together as a joint experiment and try to fill this together with your mate as much as you can with all the details. And then write down your hypothesis, and then I'll ask all of you to put your things in the Mentimeter, and then we'll see if the hypothesis was supported or not. So here I'm trying to move you from a class discussion to putting stuff on paper the way that it appears in an academic publication, in an academic paper, then make a specific prediction, and then test this prediction together with us in the classroom, okay? So take 3 minutes to try and put down in that table how the experimental design for 3A versus 3B happened here. All right, so hopefully by now you have the table written down. Now make your predictions. You have two conditions. What is the relationship between the conditions? Higher, similar, lower? And also indicate your design. Is it a between design or is it a within design? Okay, so hopefully you have a decision. Yeah, all good? Right, yeah? You have a prediction? All right, we'll start with the very obvious. What is this, between subject design or within subject design? Yeah, so maybe you need to define your dependent variable in a way that would allow you a comparison between condition 1 and condition 2. Yeah, very important. So what's our experimental design, between or within, based on what we did in the classroom? Or within. All of us saw all of the conditions, so that's pretty obvious. If this would be a between subject design, what would need to happen? How would we turn this into a between subject design? Yeah, 2 different groups, and then what? Random assignment. We need to randomly assign you to one of the 2 groups so that there are no specific differences in there. All right. So now that we have this, and you kind of gave this some thought, you already came across some challenges. So like, oh, how do we compare condition 1 to condition 2? I'm going to introduce you to an extension. I just want to make one small point about the prediction. The prediction has 3 options: larger than, about same, smaller than. Using the statistical test that we usually use with the p-values, which of the 3 can we test with statistics, with null hypothesis significance testing? We have larger than, about the same, smaller than. Can we do a statistical test with p-values for all of these? No. Why not? Yeah. Which one here is the null hypothesis? Right. So null hypothesis just means that there are no differences between condition 1 and condition 2. So significance testing for null hypothesis just means that we detect differences between effects. So when we see data, it's like, how likely is this data if we assume that the null hypothesis is true? So we can search for evidence for larger than or smaller than, but we cannot search for evidence using null hypothesis significance testing for about the same. For that, we need equivalence testing, Bayesian statistics, some other things. So just generally, in your predictions, even if you want to assume, even if you assume that it's about the same, the way that you write down your hypothesis is that there are some differences, and then whether you're able to detect these differences or not detect these differences. One last clarification about this is that if you don't detect any differences, this does not say anything about the null hypothesis, which could be true or not true. We're not going to go much into this, but I just want you to be sensitive to the issues of null hypothesis. I know that this thing exists. All right. So here we have something called an extensions guide, which I used in many of my other courses, and I want to show this to you. So you can scan this or go on the mgto.org extension guide. And you can use this whenever you're thinking about extensions, which will happen in task 3. So basically, you're going to take my paradigm, which is going to be very similar to the Dictator game, and you're going to run an extension on that. You're going to run an intervention from your own domain in order to extend that over there. So if we go to this, if you want to get to these guides, just want to show you that this is all on my website. So for example, you can go to mgto.org and then go to resources and examples. And over here, you'll have a very long list of all our collaborative guides. And we'll be using some of these, like for example, the Qualtrics guide and the Qualtrics template. And here we have the collaborative extensions guide. So if I double click on this, it will open, this is the Qualtrics or extensions guide. So this is the extensions guide. It says designing extensions for replication. So many of the, yes, what? yeah, it's open for editing, I think, but just for commenting, for suggesting. Yeah, you can suggest. So it is a collaborative. So all the guides that I do through this class are open for suggesting, and then if it's something that I approve, then it becomes part of the guide. And if you contributed, then you should add your name and all that. But generally, this is just a guide for how others should do extensions. What you can see over here is that I have a bunch of recommendations about all kinds of extensions to avoid. So I recommend to my students not to do extensions about things like reaction time, gender, age, and all sorts of other various obvious individual differences. And then, as you can see, there's a bunch of examples of how to do an experimental study design table. And if we'll go to example 3, actually, one of the examples is about the Dictator game, where it has the same setup as you've seen right now. So part A, part B. So this is the giving, this is the taking. And then here is exactly the same exercise that you had in this class, task number 1. And then for the solution of this, it looks a little bit like this. So I hope this is large enough for you to be able to see. But you can see whether this is similar, close to what it is that you've done. So basically, we've named the experimental condition Dictator giving game or Dictator taking game. And then I write down what the condition is. So decide how much you would give out of the 100 Hong Kong dollars to another classmate and how much you would take from the 100 Hong Kong dollars given to another classmate. So you just write down what the manipulation actually is within the condition. And then there's the dependent variable, which has to do with the money that the dictator ends up with, right? So you do need some adjustment, just like was reflected here in the classroom, because the dictator gives to the dictated, and then it needs to be reversed, so it's 100 minus, versus the dictator take, and then both of them finally at the same kind of scale of 100 Hong Kong dollars. Is this clear? Pretty straightforward, right? So based on this design, you can decide to do a lot of other things and other extensions, and we'll do one example of an extension together. So if we go back in order to the Mentimeter, so I'll ask you to go on the Mentimeter and just give me what it is that you wrote in your pages. So now you have a prediction. We're going to run this on this very small sample of 2, 4, 6, 8 groups. So in the 8 groups, go and punch this up here. We're first going to go do the giving, and then we're going to do the taking, and then we're going to look at the differences, and then you can check whether your hypothesis was correct or not. All right, so we have 2 here. I'll also give you a chance to, once you finish this, you can also go to the taking game. Yeah, so just put in what it is that you wrote in your. Okay, so I think I heard some of the predictions by one of the teams over here. 4, 6, okay, good. So now that we've had the experimental setup here in the classroom together, we're going to look at the outcome. And the outcome over here is that definitely there's a deviation from the Homo economicus, which is one of you wrote above 50. I think there's a consensus over here that it's closer to 0. And then most of you would give more than that, somewhere between 33 Hershey kisses and 4 Hershey kisses. So 35, just about. Some of you said about a 50-50 split. Some was closer a little bit to the 0. But actually, if you look at this, nobody gave 0. So actually, no one acted in this classroom or in these groups like the Homo economicus, which already shows something fundamental about how economics deviated from human behavior, right? So we have the 32.8 over here. If we go to the next one, in the taking game, what are we going to see? If I show the results from the taking game, what's going to happen? Higher, lower? Sorry? Higher? Yeah? How many of you think higher? Raise your hand. In the amount of money that's left with the dictator. Okay, so is that what you meant with my DV? Okay, so amount of money that is kept with a dictator. So here, how much money is kept with a dictator? On average, about 70, right? So how much money is the dictator going to end up with in the taking game? You think lower? Lower? You meant lower or higher? Lower. Is there a consensus about lower? Anybody think higher? Yeah? No, higher? Okay. There are Hershey kisses for anybody who gets this right. All right. So let's see what's going to happen over here. All right. So once again, Homo economicus gets very, very close to 100. What happens over here? Gives about half, left with about half. So the dictator is left with 50 compared to 70 in the first one, right? All of you said supported. Is it written in your papers? Yeah? Okay. Do you want Hershey's or do you want something else? What kind of prize do you want? You've earned it. It's yours. Hershey's? Okay, I'll give you something else. Let's see. I brought like a bunch of stuff and I need to give it away, so might as well. Yeah. All right. So take one and give the others. Take one and pass it along. So well done on your predictions. This is instead of getting a paper published. So usually we run the experiment, we write it up, we submit this to a journal, and we get our paper published. So this is great. So what explains this? Is this what you predicted? Directionality, yes. In terms of the numbers, is this surprising to you? No? All right, so we've seen how a very slight manipulation of giving versus taking has shifted something from 35 to about 52, right? Homo economicus, we saw, should not be sensitive to this in any way. You're putting down what? You're passing it along. One sneaker is equal to how many Hershey's? That's the exchange rate, 1 to 4. Okay, that's funny. Okay, that's great. So we completed our first experiment showing how psychology comes into play in just shifting between giving and taking. All right, so we ran this and we ran this live. And now I'm going to show you how this is set up on Mentimeter. And then we'll discuss the problems with Mentimeter. So let's say that you want to run this experiment. You're running your own classes, and then you have Mentimeter as a tool. I'll show you what this looks like. So basically on Mentimeter, what you can do is I can add the content. I can add my question. I can add my statement. Don't want you to answer right now, right? And then I can see, I can decide whether I want this as a scale from 0 to 100. I can decide to, if I do like a new slide, I can do things like multiple choice. So I can have a decision between different things. So for example, in a prediction, I can say lower, about the same, and then higher, and ask what is your prediction, right? So this is very easy to set up in Mentimeter. It also has like a free trial. So you can do up to, it's not even a trial. It's like it's free up to 2 slides. So as long as your presentation has 2 slides, you can run this in your own classrooms whenever you do a presentation and do an experimental design. Now, looking at these two together, experiment 3A and experiment 3B, why would I not use Mentimeter for my experimental surveys as a real scientist? What's the problem? What are the weaknesses here? Where is this lacking? what can't I do with this interface? Yes? Yeah, statistical test, I would need something different, but I think what you're saying is that you want to be able to see the result. Yeah, so actually we can look at this together. So you can see over here, view the result. And what you would be able to do over here is go over here and press export result. And then based on this, it will give you an Excel. You take this Excel and then you put this into Jamovi or SPSS or R, and then you're able to actually analyze this. Here, I'll show you what this looks like. So it is anonymized. So there's voter 1, voter 2, and then you can see some of the responses. You can see what this looks like. You need to set this up a little bit, but you are able to export and run statistics on this. However, there's some other limitations. For example, what kind of other limitations do you have with Mentimeter? It's public, so we run this in a classroom, obviously, right? You can't exactly give this to people and they'll do this at their own free time. This has a pace, so you have to do this together, everybody together, and see the voting in real time. And one other thing that we discussed is that you don't have randomized order. You can't do a between subject design. This is a within subject design. But if I want to split you up into two different sections with this tool, I really can't, which is why I hesitate to try and run things with Mentimeter in a between subject design. How did I do this last week? I randomized pieces of paper, gave this to you separately, and then I had one that said version A and version B, and I asked you, please don't answer something that is not your question. Now, that's, of course, something that you can't do with real participants and real experiments, right? Which is why we need something a bit more complicated. And we want to have more control, which is why we've used Qualtrics. I use Qualtrics almost for everything that I do. And I want to show you what that looks like if you haven't had the chance to look at this together. And we'll try and construct the Dictator game here together. How many of you have some experience with Qualtrics? Have done something you've done? Yeah? A bit? Have you seen Qualtrics? Played with it a bit? Some? Yeah? All right. So I'm just going to show you what a setup with Qualtrics looks like. So yeah, in order to sign up for this, you just go to qualtrics.com. And then you need to put in your Hong Kong University login. If you haven't created an account, you should go and do that. You can see that almost everything that I do is here. So there's a bunch of ways for you to collaborate. So that's another thing that Qualtrics does. So you can assign a specific survey to collaborate with other people, and everybody can edit this at the same time. This is good and bad at the same time because somebody else can mess up your survey. However, you'll be able to see that there's a version control in here. So what we'll do is that we'll create a project. You can create a blank project from nothing. Survey. Get started. So this will just create a blank survey, and in a blank survey, test 1, create a blank survey. Or here you can import a QSF file. Everybody who's working with me on replications runs the experiments on labor markets like Amazon Mechanical Turk or Prolific Academic, where I pay something like 12 to 15 cents for each minute of participation based on the minimum wage in the US and the UK. And this has a few parameters. In order to meet these parameters, we've actually got something called a QSF file template. So you can see mturk, so you can get to this from the resources over here. And there's a Qualtrics experiment template for mturk or Prolific that you can go into here, and you can download the QSF over here. And instead of what's this? And instead of creating a blank survey, you can actually import the QSF file. So I'll just show you what this QSF file looks like. So if you'll go to the download section, you'll see that I downloaded this here. So I'm going to import this, and I'm going to create this project. Now, the nice thing about Qualtrics is that it allows you to do very advanced experiments with a very simple interface. So typically, all of my studies have a very similar design. You can see over here all the blocks and what the blocks have and the typical kinds of questions. If you go here on the left, you have something called a survey flow. So let's just take a look at our survey flow. At the beginning, I set some embedded data that has to do with from the labor market, from Amazon Mechanical Turk or Prolific. I get some things like what is the assignment ID, what is the country code, and a bunch of other things like the individual worker, what is his or her Prolific ID. Then there's a few spam related measures to combat spam and make sure that there are no automated responses. So this is kind of like things embedded in Qualtrics. Then I do a bunch of checks about the countries. So most of my experiments I restrict to participants who have an IP that is based in the US or based in the UK. Right now it's not doing anything. Then I do some spam measure related things. So you can see that if it doesn't meet the spam requirements, so it doesn't look like a human participant, it goes to the end of the survey. And then we run the consent form. Then I set out the study outline. Then we have the core. Sorry, then we have some checks about whether a person indicates that they are a native English speaker, whether they are agreeing to consenting to paying close attention, and they understand that this has attention and comprehension checks, and then they get the idea, and then the Prolific ID, and then over here, this is the core. This is where we'll work on our stuff, and then afterwards, after each experiment, we're adding a funneling section, a demographic section, pay feedback because I want to know if they feel like they're underpaid, and then I give them bonuses to compensate for this, to make sure that we have not overwhelmed them with the amount. Sometimes I underestimate the length of the survey. And then finally, this is an important component in IRB ethics related stuff is debriefing. So consent and debriefing are in each and every one of these experiments. So if we go into back into the builder, we can see for every one of these components what's in there. So the consent form has the basic things that the Hong Kong University Ethics, IRB, requires, for example, purpose of the study, procedures, potential risk, benefits, compensation, confidentiality, participation, and withdrawal. So actually, if somebody puts in 8 zeros, even if they haven't completed this, they will still get compensated. So everyone has the ability to withdraw from this at any time. Most of them, actually, till now, I've had very few that ever use this option, but they should know that they have the ability to withdraw without any penalty. Then you have to put in the approval number for the IRB and so forth. All right, study outline. This study involves decision making, how many pages, then a bunch of checks. Are you able to pay close attention? Yes, no, probably not. Now, one of the things that I do over here is that if you click on this, you'll see that actually there's a bunch of things over here on the top right. For example, this question has response requirement. And the response requirement just means that somebody has to answer something. So for example, you can see here, response requirement, add requirement, force response. So somebody cannot proceed to the next page without answering this. In addition, if you press on this, there's a choice randomization. So these are the 3 choices. And this means that display answers in a random order. So one of the things that I couldn't do in the Mentimeter is that I couldn't randomize the choices. One of the things that I can do here is that I can press on this and I can do preview question. The order here is yes, no, and not sure. But if I press this, it should give me different order every time. Wait, let's do this for the entire block. So I can do this block level and question level, preview block. So you can see it really randomizes these things. So for example, not sure, probably not, no, and yes, kind of randomizes these things. Yes? Yeah. So I run okay. First of all, they know. So I make a calculation. For example, I see that my survey is usually between 3 to 5 minutes. I go for the maximum of 5 minutes, multiply this by, let's say, 15 cents, and then I set the task, the entire task, to have that payment. So they have the incentive to finish this as fast as possible. However, sometimes I miscalculate, and some of them take longer than that. So I want the feedback from them. How, first of all, I look at the duration and how long it really took them on average, and even the slow ones. And then I ask them whether they're happy with this payment or not. And if I see that I've miscalculated, then I have the ability to give them, in addition to how much I allocated, an additional bonus. So it's not like I look at how much time they spend on this, and based on this, I give it to them. Obviously, this has a problem with incentives, right? But in advance, they know how much it's supposed to take and what they're paid for it. And this is based on a calculation. Okay. Yeah, good question. So you can randomize the choices, just like you've seen over here. In addition to this, you'll see that what I'm able to do is I'm able to check whether they've answered the right answer over here. So if we look at response requirements, not only is this a forced response, but in addition to this, so if we go back to the survey flow, yeah. So in addition to this, if they did not answer yes, that they're willing to do this, then it will go to the end of the survey. Well, it will tell them there is no consent, therefore you can't participate, please return this test. So in order to begin with the experiment, they must do the consent form, and they must answer the questions about yes, no, and so forth. The reason why I randomize the choices between yes, no, is because some people are just like next, 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 next. And I want to ensure that they really read these kinds of things. So the people that just do next, 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 next actually go to the end of the survey, and they need to respond this. And once this has been recorded, they can't retake the survey. So once they've, said that they have to return this, they have to return this. They can't come back to it. So this is how I manage consent, to make sure that everything is consented. So you can have a look at the template and play around with this in order to make sure that you understand it. Going back to the Dictator game, what do we need over here? So we have two sub experiments, 3A and 3B. And for that, I can actually add different elements. So for example, here I can add a block, and then I can select the block from the builder. So I'll go to the builder, and after all the consent and before the funneling, over here I can add a block, and in this block I can put a name, for example, Dictator giving game. And then here I can add another block, and this is going to be Dictator taking game. If I go back to the here, you can see that I have Dictator giving game and Dictator taking game. Let's assume that I've built these blocks, okay, that they have exactly what it is that I need. How do I do the randomization? So you can see over here, I already added a randomizer. And what I'll do is I'll move these two blocks into the randomizer. And then you can see over here that it tells the randomizer how many of these two conditions is every participant going to see. So if they see 2 out of the 2, this is a within subject design. If we want a between subject design, the only thing that we need to do is to show 1 of the 2. Okay. Another thing that you have over here, which in my randomizer in the template I've already checked that I want this, is evenly presented elements. Sometimes with randomizers, you have like, doesn't happen, it's more rare, but sometimes you have like a 70-30 chance. Sometimes some people will be allocated more to one condition than the other. Evenly presented elements means that the randomizer will try to really balance this to have about 50-50% for allocation between each and every one of those. So what you really need to focus on is building the blocks correctly, and then putting these in the randomizer. Then based on your, whether this is a within subject design or between subject design, putting these blocks over here. Is that clear? Okay, just to recap how we got here, we had a template from the resources on my website that we downloaded. Then we went to Qualtrics, we imported this. We saw the general survey outline, the survey flow, showing all kinds of things that just appear in the template that you don't need to pay too much attention to. They're just a given. And then the core, after all the verifications and all the consent and everything else, we have the core of the experiment, which is here, where we have a randomizer that randomizes two conditions, either between design or within design. And then within these two blocks, we need to enter the actual content. So over here, you'll see that if you add a new question, you have a bunch of things, a lot more than what the Mentimeter had. So you can have like a slider, a matrix, text entry, multiple choice, and whatever else side by side, like a bunch of very complicated things. Let's see. All right. So basically, what I can do is that I can add a question. I can do this like a multiple choice or a slider or a text entry. So for example, if I want this to be 0 to 100, I can do enter a numerical, just enter a number. And then to make sure that this is a number, I can add a requirement and a validation to say that this should be content type of a number. And the number needs to be between 0 to 100. And this is how I verify that this question here should be entered as a number. Closing this. Okay, always allow pop-ups. Thank you. Please allow pop-up. All right. So if we do a preview, yeah, now it will open this. There's a pop-up, and then you'll see the actual question. Here you'll put in the question that you want to ask. So for example, if we look at the design over here, we can ask like, for example, we can copy paste this into the question here. We can decide like how we want to do this. We can also have like a rich text sort of right, copy paste. For example, we can have this kind of thing. It's very important to have meaningful kind of variables. So for example, you can say giving dv1, and then you can run this and see whether this works or not. Now, another thing that we have in the resources is that we have a Qualtrics guide, which I opened over here. And what you can see over here is that we have a bunch of guidelines. So for example, how to keep the file name, engaging with participants. But the thing that I wanted to show you about this is having variable, the variables names should be meaningful. So for example, here it should have at the beginning some indication of the condition and then some indication of the DV. So if we try and do this, for this one, it's giving, but instead of DV1, Dictator kept. And then for the other one, what we can do here is just like copy this. So we can make a copy, and then we can drag this into the other one. And then we can do over here taking, and then Dictator kept. And then over here, we can also, the good thing about copying is that it already has all the 0 to 100. And then over here, what you can do is just copy paste the other one. That's it. Pretty straightforward. I've been using this for a very, very long time. You can see like the number of projects here, like over the, I don't know, 4 years that I've been with HKU, like 690 experiments. So this kind of wraps up our Qualtrics section. Any general questions about this? Something that you want to raise or ask about how to use Qualtrics? No, I'll just say Qualtrics.
So, welcome to the fourth tutorial for advanced.
This is a familiar voice. So Christy took you step by step with the Qualtrics. So you can go and have a look at the full tutorial. This is just to give you a taste of what Qualtrics actually looks like, but really takes you through what was here. Yeah, the chapters is like important links, creating questions, comprehension checks, recording values, exporting data, our template, and everything else. All right, so we'll move back to the. So all the links are actually in the presentation. We saw that there's some stuff missing in the Mentimeter, and then we saw that Qualtrics is a much more powerful tool. But then, obviously, with complexity also comes the occasional frustration. So just be gentle with the tool, go slowly one by one, and make sure until you become familiar with this. Look at the tutorials that we have and so forth. Now that we've seen the Dictator game, giving and taking, there's the question of what other extensions we can add to this. So I'll show you one extension that I typically give in this kind of scenario that I think adds something very important in a social psychological perspective. I am a social psychologist, therefore this is something that I really care about. So we'll talk a bit about a public exchange. So the original assumption in the Dictator game is that there is nobody there to watch us, but because we're embedded in a social world, you talked about social exchange, social implications. Now we want to do exactly the same thing as 3A and 3B, but now we have two more versions, 3C and 3D. So I want you to take a few moments and go over 3C and 3D together with your partner and kind of contemplate what are the differences from the previous versions and what you would answer in this case. So as you can see, the only manipulation that I added is that it says everything you do is publicly announced to all your friends and family. Okay, have you come to a conclusion? Yeah, all good? Yeah. All right. I think we'll just like run this in class. So we'll do this with the four of you, okay? What would you rather be? Dictator, dictatee? 3C. What would you rather be? Dictator? So you're the dictator, is that okay? All right. So this is the giving game. Here you go. Okay. So you decide how much you want to give, and both of you. And just remember that whatever it is that you decide to do here, we're going to take this YouTube and going to broadcast this to all your family. So how much did you get? 5. Okay. How do you feel about getting 5? Pretty good. Yeah. Why? Tell me more. Equal. Okay. Generous, you feel? All right. Why did you give 5? Is this what you wrote? Okay. What's the reason for that? Okay, so it's more about fairness rather than a different kind of reputation, because you can have a reputation as more than fair, right? Okay, so why is fairness the most important thing here? Okay, yeah, fairness, right? How about some other goals? What other goals are there aside from fairness? What else could happen here? More willing to cooperate? Okay, great. We need 4. Yes, you wanted to say something? Yeah. What do you think about this case? Mm-hmm. Yeah. It seems like your friends and family really care about fairness, so you're thinking about them. It is possible that we'll have friends and family that have other kind of values, right? What kind of other values can our family have? Like you could have brought back Hershey Kisses and you gave some of this away. Why, right? Maximize. Or there are others less fortunate than us at HPU. Maybe you should have given everything. We have enough Hershey Kisses at home. Why would you even want to keep any of those, right? So you can have different kinds of friends and family. So what is the main conclusion that we can have about friends and family? What does friends and family add to this? Could be fairness, but could also be other things, right? What is this thing that they do that they have? Beliefs. Uh-huh. What is a belief? Uh-huh. Norms is good. Norms indicates what kind of things? Yeah, what other people usually do, what we expect others to do and would punish them if they don't do. These are kind of things, the norms. We have injunctive, which is like how we punish people if they don't follow this, and we have descriptive of what we see other people do. So norms are very, very powerful. We have belief. Belief have to do with do we want equality, fairness? Do we believe in other things? You know, some people get all the Hershey kisses and some people don't have any access to Hershey kisses. Do we want this in society or not? So these are beliefs. Have values. What is it that you value in life? Do you want cooperation? Or do you want people to emphasize themselves more? Do you want power and achievement? So great, this was the giving game. So this was 3C. What would happen with 3D? So let's try and say explicitly, what did making this public involving friends and family do to experiment 3A and 3D when we move to experiment 3C and 3D? Yeah, perfect. And then what's the implications for the experimental design, for the outcome of the experiment? We observed differences between 35 and 52 in the first one. In the second one, what happened? Seems like they said it's about the same. Is it for you as well? Would you differ between giving and taking in 3C and 3D? Same pattern? Yeah, can you say a little bit more about that? Why is it the same pattern? If we emphasize fairness, they say fairness is the same across these two, but you're saying something, there's an additional factor. What's the difference? 3C and 3D, what did you write? So you think both of them will shift towards more. It's not that the differences would disappear, but rather both of these would move together. Okay, terrific. This is what I was hoping to get at, because initially, what I was suggesting was an interaction. We observed differences between 3A and 3B, but these differences were weaker when we moved to 3C and 3D. This is an interaction. However, what you're suggesting is a main effect. Everything shifted together in the same direction. It's not like the differences became weaker or larger. They remain about the same, but they move together in the same direction. So rather than interaction, we do, it's called like a main effect. You move together in both of these experimental designs. Yeah, is that clear? All right. So depending on what your prediction is, rather than having one directional prediction, the differences between condition 1 and condition 2 are this. Now you're making predictions about two different factors. One is what happens when you introduce the public, right? Friends and family. And the second one is what happens when you shift between giving and taking. Then you have two factors. If one of the factor influences the other factor, that is an interaction. If regardless of the other factor, everything shifts because of one factor, that is a main effect. Okay? Good. So we understand this part. And now your task is, in task 2, is to suggest two types of extensions. One of them is to take the original task 3A versus 3B, the experimental design from task 1, and then add another condition to it. Or add an additional dependent measure for that, and then put this in the table, the same kind of table as the one that you did in task 1. So think about something that you want to manipulate. It could be like a public sharing this with your friends and family, and then add this as another condition to the original experimental design. What would you like to manipulate? What would you like to add? So take a couple of minutes, 5 minutes, and then talk this through. Maybe 3 minutes. Let's do this 3 minutes. More than one condition. You want to add more than one condition.
I think so.
Okay, you want to add a factor rather than a condition. What is the other factor? Okay, past experience.
Yeah, but
Okay. So maybe change it only to one of these conditions. So do like giving with that. So you can compare the giving with past experience to giving without past experience. So just add that as like one condition without adding it like past experience taking. Put that aside. Yeah, if you thought of you have a third condition, something interesting. What have you thought about? The relationship between the two players? Okay. Oh, whether they know each other or not. Okay, great. Yeah, that's a very good one. So one suggestion here is about the relationship between the two players. Do they know each other or not, right? How close are they? Great. Any other suggestions? We had past experience over here. So past experience, whether they had a previous engagement with a dictator and have suffered as a result, right? It was a painful experience or not. Great. So just to show you what this looks like, so we keep these two together the same as before, and then we add one thing. For example, this is done in class in front of everybody. If we just change one of these factors, then we can add this as one condition, just changing the giving game. If we would add a fourth one with the public taking game, then it would be a 2 by 2. So we have two different factors. One other thing that I added over here is not only the previous dependent variable, but I also added fairness. So do they perceive this to be fairness? So how important is it to be fair in this game? Or how important is fairness to the dictator? So you can decide to add something that would reflect the differences between the original conditions and the new condition, just so that you can measure this more precisely, so you don't have to guess what caused the difference in the dependent variable. Okay, is this clear? All right. So it gives you kind of like a sense of how we talk about extensions, how we add additional conditions, how we add certain variables to the design, and then how we describe the experimental design in a table in our templates. The final one is called the Ultimatum Game. We'll walk through this together. This is an interesting one. This is actually a classic economics game in game theory. And here what we have is the first player, the proposer, conditionally receives a sum of money and proposes how much to give to the other player. The second player, the responder, chooses either to accept or reject this proposal. But if the responder rejects, then both get nothing, right? And then you need to put yourself in the shoes of, as the proposer, how much would you propose to the other person, keeping in mind that if you're rejected, you will get nothing. And then as the responder, what would you say you would accept or reject to their offer? So what is the minimum sum offer that you would accept? So try and answer this and make a prediction. You have a number in mind?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I'm going to play with you. Is that okay?
Okay.
You haven't played yet, right?
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right. So we have one team that made a decision. Yeah, you have a proposal in mind? All right, great. So we'll play one final game of this. So finally I get to like finish everything. You get like the Toblerone. I hope that there are 10 over here. I don't know actually. Yeah, definitely 10. All right, so you have the potential of getting 10 Toblerone, right? There's a team over there. You're proposing, and they're the ones that get to either accept or reject your offer. So out of the 10, how many are you proposing that they will receive? They're proposing 5, 50 Hong Kong dollars or 5 Toblerone. Are you accepting this based on your paper? Yes? All right, good. So we got 5 here. Yes? Did 5? Right. Good. Well done. So let's hear what you wrote as a proposer and a responder. What did you say and what was your logic? What did you write? Yeah, which you did. And then you said as a responder you would accept, the minimum that you would accept would be 50. What's the logic? Fairness? Okay. Interesting. Okay. So fairness. What did you write? Proposing and accepting? 50 and accepting 30. You'll accept 30. So you could have actually proposed 30 and they will still accept it. Yeah. What was your logic? For them, they wanted to be fair. Right. Okay. So a bit of a compensation for the fact that you're not the one that had this initially. A bit like the ownership aspect that we. Yeah. 50 is a bit risky though, right? Right. Why would we not accept everything that is above 0? Is the Homo economicus. Why would we? Yeah. So what we're doing essentially, what is it that we're doing when we're rejecting something? What are we doing? Thing is not fair, but what are we doing to the other person? We're saying it's more than it's not fair. We're doing something. We're punishing. We have the ability to punish. What do we gain by punishing? We're not going to do another game of this. Here it's a classroom. Maybe they know them, maybe they don't. But now I chose like 2 different teams, right? I don't know if they are the same group. They'll ever talk again. I don't know. Why would they even care enough to punish them? Why not just like whatever they say, we'll say yes. What's the role of punishment here? Sorry? Guilt. Yeah, you want them to feel guilty. Say more about that. Take this a step further. Yeah, what does guilt do to a person? Why would you want them to feel guilty? So that they'll never behave like this again, right? You want to stop them from this kind of behavior. So we talked about norms, we talked about beliefs, we talked about values, we talked about all sorts of things about what we want to communicate to others. Sometimes we do this by something like punishment, right? And we always need to consider whether the other person is actually going to punish us for something that we do. Because over here, we want the Toblerone, we want to have the money. We need to take into consideration that other people might not have the same kind of values, beliefs, norms as we do. So what's nice about the Ultimatum game is that it introduces a possibility to punish the other person. So fairness comes into play, but there's a bit more into this. So for example, he talked about ownership, but there is something to be said about, I want the person to know that they did wrong so that they'll never do this again. A bit like your past behavior, did they have a negative experience with this dictator? So this is the beginning of game theory. You start from a very simple dictator game. We've complicated this already because we've shown that actually it deviates from the Homo economicus. So even in the very simple dictator game, it doesn't really go according to the economic model. There is psychology in there. Then we saw that a differentiation between giving and taking creates something that is meaningful. Then adding another factor like public exposure involving your friends and family does something to the whole exchange. And then the possibility to add punishment further complicates this even more, adding additional factors, adding complexity. So we understood kind of like experimental design, how to design these kinds of things, how to think about extensions. And all this will serve as a base for something that's far more complicated. Perhaps some of you have done this in your readings, in your task about the trust game. What happens to trust in society? What happens when we don't have trust? What do we do with things like punishment, regret, guilt? Yeah. All this is to get you thinking about experimental design, game theory, judgment decision making, and how psychology affects all of that. Okay? Good. So I hope this will help you a little bit with your task 3 and all that. Any questions, things you want to follow up, tag me on Slack and we'll talk more.